The Democratic Caucus tomorrow because it's about the delegates. Let me introduce a young man that has worked tirelessly on the Ron Paul campaign. He is the leader for the Youth for Ron Paul 2012 chapter at the University of Kansas. Give it up for Mr. David Conway.
Can you hear me? Thank you for all being here. Coming out and supporting the revolution. My name's David Conway. I grew up here in Lawrence, Kansas. I'm an Army veteran. I served 2 tours in Iraq, and I'm currently a philosophy student here at KU. Dr. Paul is a humble man. He doesn't like to brag. So I just want to take the few next moments to brag about Dr. Paul and talk about some interesting facts you wouldn't normally hear in his speech. So he was a captain in the U.S. Air Force, and he served as a flight surgeon. Dr. Paul is an OBGYN that's delivered over 4,000 babies. Instead of accepting Medicaid and Medicare payments for his poor patient, Dr. Paul lowered his fees or offered services for free. He's been married to his high school sweetheart for over 55 years. Ron Paul is the only congressman to hit a home run in the congressional baseball game. He has never voted for an unbalanced budget. He has never voted to raise congressional pay. He has never voted for a government-paid vacation. He has never voted to increase the power of the executive branch. And he voted against the Patriot Act. He also voted against the NDAA. He voted against regulating the internet. He does not participate in lucrative congressional pension programs. He returns a portion of his annual congressional office budget to the U.S. Treasury every year. And Dr. Paul loves chocolate chip cookies. As a veteran, I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. He has also taken that oath, and he has a consistent record of following it. Ron Paul is my personal hero for that. Doesn't stop with Dr. Paul. It continues with you and me and the people of KU. And I promise you here today that I dedicate my life to promoting the causes of peace, liberty, and the Constitution. Now let's give it up to the man, the defender of the Constitution, Dr. Ron Paul.
And staying up. Let's have the mic stay up too. Necessary. I'm gonna have to hold the mic. How's that? I'll have to speak softly. Carry a big stick. Okay. I think that that's going to work. And thank you very much for coming on. David, thank you very much for that very nice introduction. And I want to tell you, David and Tabitha really worked very hard, and I am delighted with the turnout. This is very exciting. Also, I'd like to introduce a few members of my family that's with me tonight. My wife, I've been married to her for 55 years. And we have two grandchildren of our 18, Lisa and Linda, are with us tonight. I do know how much work David and Tabitha put into this, so I know these things don't happen accidentally, and we probably gave them 3 or 4 days notice or something like that, so this is really pretty amazing. And I heard there was a little bit of competition on campus, but I appreciate very much that you come here tonight. But I'm here to talk about a favorite subject, and it's not complex. It's simple. It's one word, talking about liberty. I don't think we have enough of it. I think we've lost too much of it. It was given to us by our Creator. The Constitution was supposed to guarantee it. We did pretty well. But the last 100 years, I say it's been slipping away, in the last 50 years especially so. So there is a need for the revival of our intellectual revolution that will defend the cause of liberty. I just met David a few minutes ago, and I was very impressed that he is a veteran, and he spent 2 tours of in Iraq, in the military. And it does remind me of the importance of our military, of course. That is one of the major functions of the federal government, is to provide a strong national defense. And that does not mean that we're supposed to be the policemen of the world, nor do we have to get involved. It means that we should be involved in nation building and getting involved in internal affairs of all nations, which the founders did not give us the authority to and advised us strongly not to. Now, David has spent enough time in Iraq to understand it. It was one of the most important issues for him to come home and decide that he would support our candidacy, because it was so important to concentrate on foreign policy and change the nature of foreign policy to that of intervention, to that of national defense. Which means, very simply, obey the Constitution. That would be a pretty good place to start. The Constitution is very clear about who should declare war, and it's not the president. It was never meant that the king, we didn't like the king declaring war, and the executive branch was not given the authority to declare war. The war power was given to the Congress, to the people, and if our country needed to go to war, it was supposed to be only with a declaration of war, with the intention that you fight, you win, you defend your country, and then you come home. Which raises a lot of question about what we've been doing in the last 10 years. And as a consequence of 9/11, certain things have been done in the last 10 to 12 years that wouldn't have been done otherwise. And for instance, if 9/11 had not occurred, we wouldn't have the Patriot Act. The Patriot Act was planned for before 9/11. 9/11 provided the opportunity to get a piece of legislation passed that they wanted. Now, if that bill had been called Repeal the Fourth Amendment, maybe it would have never been passed, but that's essentially what it did. Then when you think about what they do to us at airports, and they get this authority from the Patriot Act, once we repeal the Patriot Act, just think, the TSA will lose a lot of their authority to pod and probe and x-ray as an airport. is so much we have drifted away from in this country. We were once the most free country and the most prosperous country. It's not that way anymore. Other countries are much richer. We're the biggest debtor nation in the history of the world. And our middle class is shrinking. The wealth of this country is shrinking. We still have material wealth in this country, but it's all based on debt. And most people realize it's coming to an end. Most people realize it's not a fair distribution any longer. We're a free society, gives you the largest middle class. Our middle class is shrinking, and our middle class is getting poorer. The poor are getting poorer, and guess what? What is happening? A lot of wealth is being transferred to the privileged class. And that is the reason we have to address this, because this will cause social dissension, and right now it already has. Because under these conditions, especially when you destroy a currency, you always have transfer of wealth from the middle class and the poor to the wealthy class. And then when they get the benefits from a system like that and they get into trouble, guess what they do? What they did in 07 and 08, come crying to the people. We're too big to fail. Don't let us fail. It'll be a calamity if we fail, so we need bailed out. So the Congress rushed in, the Fed rushed in, they bailed them out and bought up all the bad debt. The debt should have been liquidated. There should have been bankruptcies, but they bought the debt out. The government bought the debt. The Fed bailed it out, dumped it on the American people. And guess what? The American people lost their jobs and they're losing their houses. This is the reason that we have to reassess this whole process, especially the monetary system, as well as the destruction of our currency and the wasteful spending and the deficits. We've got to get control of the spending in Washington, D.C. That is the reason, of course, our program is to cut $1 trillion the first year in office. You know, some will argue, isn't that what the Congress is doing? Isn't that what doing? They're cutting spending. They talk about it, but there's no effort to cut spending. Nobody thinks it's serious enough to cut spending. All they're talking about is cutting the proposed increases. They work on the idea that there is a proposed increase. Baseline budgeting means the budget deficit and spending will go up steadily over the next 10 years. In the next 10 years, the plan is to spend $10 trillion of more money. So when they talk about cutting, and this automatic cut that came out of the Congress failing to have a budget, and then the super committee making a super mess of things, then they come up and they say, we're going to cut over $1 trillion over 10 years of the $10 trillion of the proposed increases, and they think you're supposed to believe that. You know, and there are no cuts. So if you cut $1 trillion over 10 years, you're cutting $100 billion. That used to be a lot of money, but nowadays they don't think that's very much. Pretty soon they're going to be talking about quadrillions rather than just trillions. But that won't add to much, because literally our national debt is going up $100 billion every month. And $100 billion every month is average. But this February broke all records. Just the February past the debt went up $200 billion in 1 month. It is very clear, common sense tells us it's unsustainable, it's damaging, because the principle is that if there's money to be spent, you don't want the politicians and you don't want the bureaucrats spending the money, we want the people to spend the money. I've had a few years in Washington off and on. It wasn't there straight through 30 years, but I tell you what, I've met a lot of politicians and I've met a lot of bureaucrats. And I can guarantee you one thing, they're not smart enough to know how to spend your money. You should spend your own money, not the politicians. That's the reason when people tell you cutting $1 trillion would be harmful to the economy, just tell them it would be much better, because when the government spends $1 trillion, they take the money from the people. That's pain, and that's a loss. But then when the government spends it, then they spend it on more laws. That's another loss. So you lose twice on it. This very year, on January 1st of this year, 40,000 new laws were put on the books. So I'm looking forward to the day that if you are to see that I am elected, I want to make sure I would like to have a year where we get rid of 40,000 laws. We don't have a shortage of laws. We have too many laws, obviously. Which means, though, in order to do this, we have to decide once again what the role of government ought to be. The founders did that. They gave us a constitution. Of course, we have drifted from that. But we need to ask that question, and quite frankly, the Constitution is not complex. It just says it's to protect liberty, it's to protect our freedoms, have a strong national defense, but it's to give us a sound currency. But it's not to run the world, it's not to run an entitlement system, and it's not to run up deficit. And it certainly didn't give the Federal Reserve authority to print money at all. The central bank and creating new money out of thin air occurred at the Constitutional Convention, and it was an argument between the Jeffersonians and the Hamiltonians, and the argument, it continues to go on. The Hamiltonians won, and they gave us a national bank, and Jefferson got rid of the first one, and Andrew Jackson got rid of the second national bank. But we're waiting for the day when we can get rid of the third national bank. Year might be an opportune time for that, because the Federal Reserve will be 100 years old. They came into existence in 1913. They've destroyed about 98% of the value of the dollar they inherited in 1913. So I think we'll celebrate next year by repealing the Federal Reserve Act that's beginning. Understood this issue very clearly. They had had runaway inflation with the continental dollar, so they wanted to prevent the agony of currency destruction. So they said, only gold and silver can be legal tender, no authority for a central bank, and you cannot print paper money. And look at what we have today. They thought it was going to work, and for a while it did, because we were so rich, we were issuing the reserve currency of the world, our credit was good, but it's all coming to an end right now. And it especially has been made worse in the last 40 years, since 1971. Because up until 1971, although we weren't on a gold standard, there was a loose link to gold. There were some restraints on the creation of new money. But since 1971, we have been building this horrendous worldwide financial bubble, which we are seeing now coming unglued. And this is what these last 5 years are all about. This is what the chaos in Europe is all about. And our Federal Reserve and our Treasury has indicated that the American people, because we still have some credibility with our dollar, we will bail out Europe. But I can guarantee you, it'll destroy the dollar. It'll destroy our economy and make it much worse for us. So no bailouts of Wall Street, no bailouts of European Wall Streets either. The real sinister part of a central bank is that you can hide the effects. It is a tax. When you print money and the value of the currency, it is a tax. but it's so unfairly levied on the middle class. The wealthy don't care how much gasoline prices are. You know, if you're making millions on Wall Street, if gasoline's $4 or $5, what do they care? But what if you're in the middle class? What if you're poor? What if you're struggling? What if you want to pay your own bills? And gasoline goes from $3 to $5. It can wipe a company out or a family. It can be very, very harmful. So this is the reason that inflation is so damaging, because the tax falls on the middle class, and the people who get to spend the money first have all the benefits. Who gets to spend the money first? First it's the government, then it's the military-industrial complex, then it's the banking system, anybody who has a contract with the government. So therefore it's very unfair, it's immoral, it's bad for the economy, and worst of all, it encourages the growth of big government. It should stop. Thomas Jefferson argued the case for no borrowing. He lost that argument, and it would have been a good idea that we couldn't even have borrowed. But even the borrowing, we're going way beyond that. There's a limit to taxation because, people would resist it. And then we started borrowing. There's a limit to that. Our interest rates go up, and that's why they had to create the system of just creating money out of thin air. So what we need to do, though, is eliminate this ability to finance deceitfully big government, because that encourages the growth of the entitlement system and also the warfare system. And while doing this, they think they can get away with it by delaying the payment, but eventually the payment comes due. It used to be said that we would say, we can't keep spending like this. We're going to pass this debt on to the next generation, to so many of the young people here. You know what? It isn't the next generation. It's this generation. It's us today, and that's why we have to do something now. The entitlement system was introduced when we were still a very, very wealthy nation. We were a creditor nation. Today we're a debtor nation, the biggest debtor nation in the history of the world. But we introduced this notion that, yes, we have to have the entitlement system, because if government doesn't take care of those who are needy, nobody will. But what they didn't realize and didn't understand, and now we're coming to the realization that once the government embarks on taking care of those who are less well off than others, yes, they will create equality. They create equality of poverty, and that's why we cannot depend on the government to produce wealth or distribute it fairly. They can't do it. It's always done through special interests if it's done that way, and that's why you have to challenge the entitlement system. Entitlement sounds like a right. Well, I'm entitled to this, I want this, I demand this, I have a right to this, but nobody is entitled to somebody else's wealth. Nobody's entitled to somebody else's wealth. If the entitlement system actually created wealth and had a fairer distribution and we would all be better off, it'd be a little tougher. I'd still argue the case, the moral case, against government force. But it isn't the case. They don't make us better off. They make us worse off. They're the ones who create these problems of malinvestment and deficits and all the problems we face. But you know, I was thinking one time, and I introduced legislation along this way to get the American people to understand how much this is really costing. Let's assume for a minute that you couldn't inflate the debt, you couldn't monetize debt, and let's say we couldn't borrow money, and then we had to pay our bills as we went along. What about, under those conditions, make sure that there's no withholding tax, that your businessman, your boss, doesn't withhold your tax and becomes the tax collector, and just say that every one of us, to pay for the war and pay for the entitlements, every month we send a check to the government. I believe it would end rather quickly. People would be so furious about what it really costs. They would argue the case, these wars aren't worth it. What are we doing over there? How many years does it take for us to wake up? I say, I would say by now, after 10 years, we ought to wake up, and it's time to come home and bring our troops home from the Middle East. We don't need any more war. One way, of course, if we wouldn't go to war unless war was declared, there'd be a lot less war. We wouldn't have had one since World War II. Just think of the wealth of this country. We don't go to war in a proper manner, and this week it was a rather startling event in the Senate when Panetta was before the Senate, and he said, well, we get our authority from international organizations like the UN and NATO. Now, Senator Sessions challenged him. Thank goodness he was there to do that. It isn't a brand new idea. We've been doing this for a long time, but the American people and the members of Congress are getting a little bit annoyed with this, and so he was challenged and says, where do you get this authority? And they indicated, well, from the UN and NATO, but we will inform the Congress on what we're doing. Well, thanks a lot. Wow. This idea of informing Congress, which is informing the people through their congressmen should make the decision to go to war, not the king, not the president. I can promise you, if I am to be your president, I will not be fighting undeclared wars all around the world. The wars that we have fought these past year have added $10 trillion to our national debt. So they're not cheap and they're ongoing. Just think of the expense that is long term, the taking care of our veterans. And so often they don't get taken care of very well. Sometimes they have a hard time getting the medical care that they need. But this is a very, very expensive. I've argued the case. I even said this in the debate a week or two ago, that listen to the other candidates. You might not accept my moral argument. You might not accept my constitutional argument, but I'll tell you one argument you can't refute, is we can't afford these wars any longer, and we ought to quit them. But there's a lot more going on than just the wars, the war atmosphere that has happened in this country, whether it's passing the Patriot Act or an ongoing war that we have had for essentially in modern times since in the early 1970s, has been this war on drugs. Not a good war at all. It's estimated that $4 trillion have been spent. I don't think it's done a bit of good. It's been very expensive, and it has been a tremendous underminer of our civil liberties. This is the reason so many people now, with the use of the Patriot Act, that they can bust into houses without proper search warrants. And did you know that every once in a while they go into the wrong houses and kill people by looking for drugs? So it is something that we should challenge. I personally have such strong abhorrence of drugs, but I also know from being in medicine and in politics that prescription drugs are our biggest problem with addiction. And I'm also convinced that alcohol is a much more deadly drug, as well as nicotine, than is marijuana. I still urge everybody to be cautious, taught my children not to use drugs, and make sure everybody that it isn't the use of drugs. What we should be arguing for is personal choice. You making up your own mind what you want to do with your own body. I suspect we're starting to win this war, this battle against the war on drugs. This week, when you see Pat Robertson coming out for the legalization of marijuana, I would say something strange is going on in this country. But it's this whole idea of personal choice about what we do with our personal lives. We understand we have personal choices in our religious and spiritual life and our intellectual life, But for some reason, for 100 years or so, we have decided that people, you and I, we don't have the sense on what to do with our own bodies. And I would think that, you know, our spiritual lives and our intellectual lives are, you know, much more important than what we put into our bodies. And just think of the damage done by ill-advised religious beliefs and ill-advised intellectual beliefs. That can kill a lot of people. So this is the... This whole idea that the government's going to protect us against ourselves is really, if that's not reversed, it's the end of individual liberty, because you cannot have the government protecting us against ourselves on everything we do without then becoming an authoritarian government and destroying our personal liberty. So that has to be challenged and over. Not only do they not let us make our choice about what we put into our mouths and our body, they have taken away some other choices. I think it's rather disgusting that we can't even pick our own light bulbs to buy. Yeah! And every once in a while we find out there are economic advantages to the companies who want to throw out all the old light bulbs and make us buy all the new light bulbs that don't work very well. So there's always a special interest. Once you get government big and there's an entitlement system and influence, believe me, the special interests go and money talks, and that's where we are today. The unfortunate part is the individual, the person who wants it. I just want to be left alone. You know, I just want to have my own life. To be able to earn my own money, even spend my own money, and not send it off fighting wars that don't make any sense. Just get the government out of our lives, off our backs, and out of our wallet. That's what we need. Recently, even in the last couple debates, it's come up, and it's the biggest story in Washington. It isn't the wars that are going on and the killing and the bankruptcy. It's who pays for the birth control pills. So I would think, why wouldn't the logical answer be, but you know, logic in Washington doesn't sell that all that well. But why shouldn't the logic be, well, whoever wants the birth control pills, why don't they go buy them? Medicine for approximately 30 years and in OB, and I prescribed a lot of birth control. That subject never came up, but that was in the old days when medicine was different. It was a doctor-patient relationship, not the government and the insurance companies and the drug companies and all the corporations getting in the middle. We have corporate medicine, and a lot of people complain about it, and the biggest complaint, it costs too much. Well, sure, it costs too much because most of the corporations are making the money, and the doctor and patients don't, you know, have an ability to work together and with each other. So government medicine is not good for us. It's a very bad medicine, and one thing for certain, it'll push the costs up. And that's the biggest problem in this country, is the cost of medicine. And whether it's Republican or Democrats, they get in and they pass more bills. I mean, the Republicans had prescription drug programs, and now we have Obamacare. And believe me, the quality of care is not going up, but I can guarantee you the price is going to keep going up. There will be more rationing. Once you start rationing, you have shortages, and we're already seeing that. That's what's happened in every socialized system of medicine. You have shortages, then you have underground economies, and the whole works. Freedom is what we need. We need to have more confidence. We need to have an understanding how the free market works, whether you're delivering cell phones or whether you're delivering medical care or whatever. Freedom works much better than the government bureaucracies do. This idea that our personal choices are totally undermined and our civil liberties are not protected, even though the founders did their very best, came out on the legislation that was signed into law on January 1st, you know, the National Defense Authorization Act. here's a bill that so many of you already know about it, but I know you didn't hear about it on the evening news because they don't talk about it. It wasn't even talked about in the debates. The other three candidates think it's a grand idea. And this means that the military can arrest American citizens without charges, without permitting them to have an attorney, without a trial, put in a secret prison indefinitely. And that is now the law of the land. So the president so often takes on too many powers, but the Congress is delivering it to him on a platter. If we're to have a republic, believe me, it's not going to happen if we allow laws like that on the books as well as the Patriot Act. Those laws need to be removed. We need to defend our liberties. The president a year ago, and again this week, Holder came and announced it in a speech, that the president has the authority under the Constitution to assassinate American citizens. But he will do it carefully, and he will check it out so that he follows the rule of law. But a careful analysis by a few people in the administration would fulfill his requirement to do it under the rule of law. Now that is very, very dangerous talk because the president has proven that he can do it, and that is that he's done it on 3 occasions. Alaki was probably a very bad guy, but they never charged him with anything. They never tried him, and he associated with the wrong people, and they said, well, he's conspiring to hurt us. So we assassinated him, and they said, well, a family member looks like he could have been an accomplice, so they assassinated his son. It turned out the son was 16 years old, and out barbecuing with his cousin, killed both him and his cousin. So this is not what we're supposed to be all about. We're supposed to be protecting our liberties, not allowing our president and our Congress to destroy our liberties. This needs to be reversed. The essence of liberty is privacy. We should have our privacy of our home and our bodies and our friends and neighbors and our meetings and all these things. Matter of fact, if you understand property rights and privacy, it protects most of all the 10 Amendments. So it is this privacy that is so important. The government shouldn't be allowed to intrude on our lives and know everything that we do. But today, the government knows everything about us. They want to even undermine, as they tried to do on Stop Online Gambling Act, Piracy Act. Fortunately, that was stopped. But we have this reverse. The government is destroying our privacy, and is government getting more open? No, they think they have to have total secrecy. When are we going to know exactly what the Federal Reserve is doing and who they're bailing out and spending their trillions of dollars? You know, a little bit of politics. There's a strong sentiment with conservatives and libertarians and Republicans to change this administration, and that is, one thing that I think most of the candidates agree on, that we should change this administration. But the whole thing is if we're going to change it, don't you think we should change policy as well? Unfortunately, over the years, we elect different parties and different leaders. We end up with the same foreign policy. We end up with the same monetary policy. We end up with the same entitlement system, the same special interest system. So we really need to change more than just the party. Now, the other candidates in this particular race, I think, are not going to be able to stand up to this. When you take one of the companies that have received the most benefit has been Goldman Sachs. Do we want to be known as the Goldman Sachs party? We're supposed to be challenging the bailouts of the Goldman Sachs. That's what we're supposed to be doing. So are we going to continue against the advice of Eisenhower that we are going to be the champion of the military-industrial complex? Anything they want to spend, we spend money. Don't cut one nickel. Have this automatic increase forever buying weapons. We have more weapons than everybody else put together. Nobody's going to attack us. We're the strongest nation ever, and we don't have to worry. That's one thing the military can do. Militarily, our country can be defended. We don't need more weapons to do that. We have more nuclear weapons than we need to probably blow up the world more than about 25 times. So I would say we certainly don't need more nuclear weapons. We need less nuclear weapons in the world is what I think. I also think that we're slipping in the direction that so many of the others speak out. They're really not challenging the Federal Reserve. You cannot solve this problem without the understanding, the economic understanding of how the Federal Reserve undermines and destroys the economy, how it creates the business cycle, how it monetizes debt and makes the government grow. So we have to be not in favor, in favor of propping up the Federal Reserve. We have to challenge the Federal Reserve. This is what we have to do, and this is the reason why I do talk a lot about the monetary policy, and we should continue to it. But also, we don't need social authoritarians. We need people to respect other people's privacies, other people's lives. This is what we need. We don't need to be told what to do unless somebody hurts somebody. If you hurt somebody else or take somebody else's property, there's a role for government. But we have to have enough confidence in ourselves that if we endorse freedom for everybody, it means we endorse freedom for others to use it in ways that we might not. But we don't have to endorse what they do. If we have the freedom of choice to spend our own money, some people are going to waste their money. But that's what happens in a free society. They should have the right to waste their money, but they don't have a right to come to us and bail them out. That's the whole thing. And this is what we should do. We should work very hard to understand the principles of liberty. Because if we do, we find out that liberty brings people together. It is a tolerance system. It is saying, yes, you spend your money the way you want, run your personal life as you want. Just don't impose your values on me or somebody else. It's your business. If there are consequences that are negative, you have to suffer the consequences. But for us to say that we want to impose values or impose our idea of how to spend money, you get into the mess that we're in now and proposing all kinds of laws of doing this and that. And I see that as just divisive. But truly, when we get people together and talking about this, the crowds are very diverse. People come together, not because they belong to a group and they want special privileges, but because we're all individuals and we want to be treated as individuals. There was a time in our history when we were very abusive and unfair to certain people in certain groups. But that doesn't mean that we should give privileges to people in certain groups either. We should all be treated equally because we're individuals. So it is that issue, it is that understanding that would bring us together and not this pretense that we can force our values on others. And when government does it, if government is involved in trying to make individuals virtuous and put force on us, believe me, they can make an effort, they can't do it, but it's always at the expense of liberty. And just think if they want economic equality, it's at the expense of liberty, it's at the expense of productivity, you have a weak economy, you have debts, and you have all these things. And then this preposterous idea that we're going to tell other nations what to do. I mean, sometimes they might not like that idea. And then we give them a choice. We say, this is what we want you to do, and if you do it, we'll give you a lot of money. And then if you don't do it, we'll give you a lot of bombs. Why don't we take the advice of the founders? Why don't we say, look, what we're going to offer is friendship and trade with people. You deal with your problems, and we're going to work hard to perfect our those individuals that have promoted the idea that we have to go around the world telling them how to live, believe in American exceptionalism. And it's been around a long time. It started probably back with Woodrow Wilson, that we are an exceptional nation. And in many ways, we have been an exceptional nation. I think we have exceptional values. But this whole idea that we can force that on other people just doesn't work. Now, if we want to spread our exceptionalism, what we should do is have a sound economy, sound money, civil liberties, peace, and then set the example of the world, and then they may want to emulate us, and that's a much better way of doing it. Think about the years that I served in the military. I was in the military for 5 years. I was drafted during the Cuban crisis. And I did not have to go to Vietnam. I had to see people who were sent there and those that came back, so I have a little understanding exactly what was going on. But historically, the French were in Vietnam for approximately 10 years, and we were there another 10 years. 1 million Vietnamese died, 60,000 Americans died, many tens of thousands were wounded, and I still see the veterans who are suffering from that war. And the war didn't go well. We had to leave. Somebody would say, yeah, like we lost that one. But what happened? They intimidated us and said, we had to go, we had to go. There was a domino effect, and the whole world, all of Asia would be communistic. Well, they won, and they were communistic at the time, but guess what happened when we quit dropping bombs on them and started talking to them? They finally became more westernized. They do business with us. We invest over there. They travel over here. We're friends with them, and China's our banker. I mean, what the heck? You know, what's going on here? So they didn't engulf the world with authoritarian communism. They're far from perfect, but we are too. But just think of what has happened with Vietnam, with peace, versus the disaster of what we tried to do with war. So on my vote, my efforts, my desire is to work for a peaceful society, not one based on war and force and intimidation. Experiment with liberty produced the freest and the most prosperous society. I believe it's deeply threatened. I think our middle class is getting smaller and we are less wealthy. And we have to make a decision, you know, on what we're going to do. Are we going to continue with the status quo and send people to Washington that's going to continue the same policy? Or are we going to send only people that will challenge foreign policy, civil liberties, challenge the Federal Reserve, challenge the budgetary spending, and this whole principle, and make sure we live within the law, live within the Constitution? So this is what is necessary. But we had the best experiment, and yet we're not doing that anymore. I mean, we're losing this. And I think what happened was freedom did create tremendous prosperity. And we as a people enjoyed it, but we concentrated on prosperity and material things, and it invited those individuals who would use government to make sure that they had access to this wealth and use force to redistribute the wealth. The entitlement system set up for the poor, except the entitlement system ended up helping the wealthy. You certainly could see that in the housing bubble. So we did that, but we forgot about freedom. We forgot about the principles. We forgot about what the revolution was all about. We forgot our Constitution. And now we're a debtor nation. We don't produce wealth. The other day somebody said, well, okay, how about this program we have here? Would you agree that the government ought to pay for that program? I said, where does the government get any money? I said, you want to tell me that I'm supposed to go steal some money so that you can have your program? Government creates nothing. They're destructive. They should be constructive in protecting liberty, but once they get so involved, they are destructive to the productive people in this country, and that's where we are today. So we have to not concentrate on the material wealth, but if we concentrate on freedom, we will have material wealth. That's the magnificent part of it. Said that if I had a choice of living in a free society where I was my own person, I could run my own life, and I would be poorer, I would want my own life. Let me tell you. But you know, as a country, we don't have to make that choice. As a country, the freer we are, the wealthier we'll be. And the more you expect to get from a government in terms of material things, and the less free we'll be. So we never have to make that choice. But we have lost our way, we've lost our confidence, we've lost this understanding. But right now, believe me, it's this whole idea, this whole concept of renewing the enthusiasm for liberty is coming alive. And it's coming alive on the campuses. That is why I'm delighted to come to a campus and find so many young people who care about it. One of the things that I enjoy the most, over the years, in the earlier years, the parents would bring young people, high school and even college people, to the office and say, all right, this is your civics lesson today, I want you to meet the congressman. And they would be sort of dragged along. But that hasn't happened in the last 5 years. Now, the young people come along and they drag their parents in. And there's been quite a few young people who have influenced their parents. I think that's pretty neat. And I always thought, well, maybe the parents will be embarrassed, you know, maybe they say, oh no. But the parents are delighted. They come in and they're all smiles. They say, that's wonderful. I am so glad my children are interested. And they have become interested. But there are a lot of others, not only the young people who have excited their parents and their grandparents, but we've also had a remnant in society, and there always is a remnant. I think of Solzhenitsyn, who was part of the Russian remnant. He was a person that was born at the time of the Russian Revolution. But by the time the Soviet system collapsed, here he was. He was well educated. He could speak English. He knew the classics. He knew something about freedom, in spite of the most totalitarian society ever. But there's always a remnant, a group of people who may be very quiet. They may be very unenthusiastic about the process because nothing ever seems changed, but they know what the truth is, they know what the principles are, and I think that group of people, those people that were the independents or the people that were undecided and just not paying attention or had dropped out, that group is alive and well and is coming together with the young people. There is a lot of enthusiasm.